But tonight we're going to talk about anger from a little different direction. So let me just say this. If you've never been here before and you wonder what is this finding freedom stuff, let me just give you a little bit of history. 9 years ago, I started working at Tamarack Rehab, and I had been a pastor for 10 years, and then I had been a bunch of health complications and different stuff and had to get out of pastoring and ended up at Tamarack and felt right at home, and it was a wonderful experience. But what happened to me after about a year or so of being at Tamarack is a couple of the clients would come to me because they all began to figure out that I was this pastor who swore once in a while, which was kind of a new thing. And they came to me and they said, okay, we love going to AA and NA and CA and stuff like that, but we want to know more about this higher power from a Christian perspective. You need to do something to help us. And so they kind of ragged on me for about a year. And so what began to happen is in my mind, a bit of a plan was forming about what finding freedom would look like. And it was really to take what was being taught at Tamarack, and that is really the reality that addiction is a symptom of deeper problems, and that's what we spend a lot of time talking about. So if you've never been to Tamarack, you're basically getting Tamarack for free plus when you come here. Don't tell the boss there, but that's what happens. And then I wanted to blend with that the 12 steps of AA and what the Bible teaches. But knowing that, for many people that I dealt with at Tamarack, they had been deeply wounded by religion. And so I did not want to come across as religious, preachy stuff, trying to shove anything down people's throats. And if you've been around here for very long, you know I do my regular rants about Christianity. And that is because I grew up as a pastor's kid. You may not have known that. I grew up in church from before I was even born. And I was in my mom's tummy, and I went to church then. And we usually went 3 or 4 times on a Sunday and 2 or 3 or 4 times during the week. So I was a church rat, if you want to put it that way. What I realized as I grew up and went to different churches is there's a lot of sick churches. And there's a lot of sick Christians. And so I began to do tons and tons and tons of thinking based on that. And so all of that got blended together into what has become Finding Freedom. And so what we're doing now is working our way very gradually through the 12 steps and then branching off in all kinds of different directions and incorporating some Bible stuff and some Tamarack stuff and really looking at the different underlying things, which is really what step 4 is all about. And so step 4, which is this fearless moral inventory, once again is trying to tell us that we are the problem. It's not the drugs and the alcohol. And what we've been looking at is what are those underlying things that set us up for addiction. And so we've come to this little section on anger. In the last 2 weeks, I've just talked about trying to help you understand whether or not you're angry. And it's been very rewarding for me to hear how many of you have come to me and said, I didn't think I had an anger problem. Now, thanks to you, I do. And I go, good. Then you heard what I was saying. And I was showing somebody my broken hand tonight where I punched a cow once who didn't want to get milked. And they said, you got an anger problem? I said, no, you just got to punch cows once in a while to let them know who's boss. But anyways, that's a different story. Everybody keeps coming to me saying, tell me how to deal with my anger. And you're good addicts because you want to go to the fix before you understand the problem. So tonight, we're going to go to dealing with anger. And next week, when we talk about getting angry at Christmas, we're going to talk about dealing with anger there. When you come to deal with anger, you really, in my mind, have to deal with it at 2 levels. There's the level of, and I'm going to use the example of a volcano. So in a volcano, you got this lava below the surface that bubbles away, molten rock, red hot, and then every once in a while it erupts, okay? So what I have been presenting to you is that you really have anger at 2 levels. If you grew up in a dysfunctional family where you were wounded, you got lots of lava buried down deep that just bubbles away. And then every once in a while, you get an explosion and that anger comes out. Okay, so everybody wants to say, how do I stop the explosion? And you go to an anger management course, and they'll give you tools for handling the explosion. And what I say is this: if you don't handle the lava, you're going to have explosions, doesn't matter how many courses you go to. And so the place to begin in dealing with anger is not necessarily handling the explosions, but learning how to get rid of the lava, how to decrease the total amount of lava inside of you. And so that's what I want us to look at tonight. Last week when we were driving home, my wife sometimes shares with me what I said that impacted her. And thankfully, after living with me for 27 years, she still gets impacted once in a while by something I say, which is good. Emily, I'm waiting for you to go to the next slide. I can't tread water much longer here. Okay. So while we're driving home, she said to me, when the question in the group was asked about anger, here's what she shared. And I don't even remember this, so she told me about it. She says, when we were first married, and she got angry one day, I said to her, what are you feeling under the anger? And if I remember right, after she described it to me, I had a vague memory of it, I think her response was nothing, just anger. I said, no, stop and think. What are you feeling under the anger? And you know, I have used that question many, many times with clients at Tamarack and with others, because what usually happens when that question gets honestly thought about is they begin to realize, I'm angry, but I'm also hurt. And usually underneath anger, you will find hurt. Now just think about that. In the very first night, I talked about what I would call healthy anger. And healthy anger is built into us by God that gets very upset whenever there's a violation of love, justice, truth, or respect. And so if you grew up in a family where there was constant violations of love, justice, truth, and respect, you felt a lot of anger. And now what happens often when you feel anger today is somehow you feel disrespected, or you feel rejected, or you feel cheated on. And so underneath your anger is really hurt. And until you get in touch with that hurt and actually let yourself say, you know what? I am feeling disrespected. I have been made to feel like a little wee kid again that is getting patted on the head and said, poor little you, you're stupid. And you get angry about that. And so it's when you get in touch with the fact that anger usually means there's hurt, and the hurt is usually connected to something very significant to me, then you start to get in touch with what is going on inside of you. So my point becomes this. If you take anger and then you take the main causes of hurt, where you always end up usually is shame. Because your hurts are because of shame. And so if you do not deal with shame, you will not effectively deal with anger. So let me just explain that a little bit further. And if you're here for the first time, I've talked about shame many times here at Finding Freedom. But in my mind, when you want to track back the roots of addiction and what is it that sets a person up for addiction, the root that you always end up with is called shame. And shame is not feeling ashamed. That's what some of you will think. It goes deeper than that. Shame is the core belief inside of you about who you are. And it is based on, if you want to have a picture of mirrors, if you want to get a picture of how you look on the outside, you look in a mirror. If you want to get a picture of what you're like on the inside, who you are as a person, there are mirrors in your childhood that reflect back to you a picture of who you are, and they do it through words and responses in 1,000 different ways. And shame is the core belief that I am not good enough, that I am a failure, that I'm not lovable or valuable, that people would not want to be with me or love me if they really knew me. And 90% of addicts have that core belief. We're going to develop it a little bit tonight. But what I want you to understand is that it comes through 1,000 different ways. So just let me give you a couple. If you had parents who were too busy for you and they neglected you, or they were there in the room with you, but they were emotionally unavailable to you, your child mind interpreted that as, it must be because of me. It must be something wrong with me that makes them not want to spend time with me. And so their neglect of you started to reflect a picture to you that says, if the two people that brought me into the world don't want to spend time with me, then something is really, really bad about me. And that started that core belief. If you're a person that was abandoned, and that could be put up for adoption, turned over to CFS, or your parents were divorced, and though they didn't technically abandon you, it felt like one of them abandoned you. What do you believe about yourself? I must be really bad that they don't want to be with me. I must be absolutely terrible that they would want me out of their life. And so abandonment is probably the mirror that gives the most painful message to a child about their worth and their value, and it's shame. But conditional love. If you were raised in conditional love where one day mom was giving you stuff because you helped clean the house and you did everything properly, and the next day when you spilled your milk or you tripped or something and you hurt your knee and mom got all mad at you because you were an inconvenience, you're going, I guess I only am lovable if I'm perfect, but if I'm not perfect, man, nobody's going to love me. And you get the core message of shame. Abuse is a powerful one. Some, if you're spoiled, that's the opposite end of the spectrum, because what happens when you're spoiled is you begin to say, doesn't anybody care about me enough to say no to me? Doesn't anybody care about me enough to stop me when I'm doing bad stuff? And it gives the exact same message. And if they're always taking away the consequences of your decisions, you're saying, aren't they loving me enough to let me grow up? And that sends the exact same message. If you have a parent that's trying to control you, everything about you, what's getting reflected to you is, I can't do anything right. Therefore, they got to control me. I must be a terrible failure. That's a scary message. But that's what's coming through. If you grew up with comparing, why can't you be like your brother? I wish you were more like your sister. That's the same message. You're not good enough. If you were made fun of for a bodily part, for your weight, for the way you wrote or talked, or if you were made fun of because you got scared, or if you wet your bed or any of that kind of stuff, you got all of those messages. If they were given names about being called pudgy or whatever, and bird brain, whatever you got, that said the same stuff, that you're not good enough. Okay, so that, if you want to understand the very core thing underneath all of addiction, shame. And that's where it comes from. Now, it doesn't have to be just from mom and dad. It can be from a brother, a sister, a teacher, a bully at school. Anybody in your life that's more powerful than you can reflect to you a message about you that's negative. What comes out of that is a lot of anger. Because no child in the world God designed should ever be treated in a way that produces shame. No child should ever receive neglect or disrespect or being made fun of or not being accepted for who they are. No child should ever have that. And so you have a natural, healthy anger that comes from shame, and that is the lava. And for some of you who were shamed from a very early age, constantly, you now can maybe understand why you've got a huge ton of anger bubbling away below the surface. Now let me show you what happens with shame at the core. Shame has three priorities in a person's life. The first and the main one, I must never get hurt again. Being hurt, I know how bad it is, and so my main priority in life is never to get hurt again. But then there's two other priorities, and they are, but I so badly want to be loved, and I so badly want to be respected. But the priority of not being hurt trumps being loved and being respected. So here's what we do. We go, I want to find a way where I can get respect without getting hurt. I want to find a way where I can get love without getting hurt. And that becomes how we operate our life. But the top priority becomes not getting hurt. So from there, and this is not happening at a conscious level. This is not a 4-year-old sitting down with a pen and paper and saying, what do I got to do to handle this shame stuff? This is all subconscious, okay? But we start to develop strategies to try to prevent getting hurt, but to get the love and respect as well. And so the pure protection piece, where we build the turtle shell around us so we never get hurt again, is we either isolate geographically, I won't be around people, that way I won't get hurt, or we isolate internally behind walls and masks. I'm not going to let them hurt me because I'm not going to let them get close enough to hurt me. That's number one. Number two, we try often to be indifferent. Whatever, nothing bothers me. Go ahead, call me any name you want. It just rolls off of me. Meanwhile, we're dying inside, but we're not going to admit that to anybody. But we try that. And then some of us, we just harden our heart. Harden everything, and it's screw the world, screw everybody. I don't care about nothing but me. And that hardness sets in, and anger plays a role in that. Anger keeps the hardness there. Anger keeps people at a distance. Anger makes people afraid to get close to us. So anger plays a role. But then we start to develop strategies to get love and respect without getting hurt. And so some of you have tried these. Some of you may have tried every one. Some of you may have only tried a few and really focused on one. But you go the perfectionist route. If I'm perfect, I'll get love and respect and I won't get hurt. Problem is you can't be perfect all the time and you wear out. And so that doesn't work. And then if I can just get a big enough, high enough position in life, a big job or a big title or something like that, then people will have to respect me for my position. Problem is, you don't respect yourself. So that doesn't work. Then you get into, well, if I have lots of money or if I have lots of possessions, then people will like me. In other words, I'll buy my friends and I'll get everybody to look up to me, and that's great till you run out of money. And so that didn't work. Some of you went the be funny route, the class clown. The problem was, once you were by yourself, you were depressed because life sucked. Some of you went down the road of promiscuity or having the perfect body. If I could just get attention through my body or through my behavior in bed, then I'm going to be loved and respected. Problem is, a funny thing happens when you start giving your body out. You get attached to people emotionally. And all of a sudden you go, I think I like this guy or I like this girl and we're in a relationship now. And then you get hurt. That didn't work. Some of you went the brains route. That didn't work for some of you because then you thought you were the most boring person in the world because you're so smart. Nobody else could get it. So that wasn't any good. Some went the people-pleasing. And that seemed to make everybody happy. But you know what? There's certain people in the world, you can do everything for them and they're still not pleased. Because there's always one more thing you should be doing. And so that doesn't work. And then you just get everybody to love you and you have relationship after relationship. And I always do this and people smile. But I find with a lot of addicts that when a relationship starts to fall apart, they don't break it off till there's another one ready. So they can move from the one into the other. Why? Because if I'm alone, that proves nobody likes me, which proves I'm unlovable. So I got to have somebody in my life on the line to prove that I'm lovable. Do you see shame working in every one of those things? It's shame trying to find a solution. Now, there's some problems with that. Every one of those strategies when you're young seemed to work. It seemed to get you attention. It seemed to make you popular and get you friends. But now, in adult life, it's causing major problems in your life. People pleasers burn out and start to hate everybody. Perfectionists, they burn out and get negative and critical about everything. All of that kind of stuff doesn't work anymore. So, where do you go with that? Let me just show you an important thing at this point that I want you to think about. What you have been doing up till then in trying to fix your shame is every one of your solutions, if you look at them, are external. It's all based on people and things in your external world. If I can get people to like me and respect me, if I can have enough things, then I will be happy. That's not really good, you know, because you still haven't done anything inside. And so the external solution doesn't work. Now, what I want to do tonight, and I've never done this before, so you're getting new stuff, is I want to show you that these strategies that we put into place end up having major flaws. They end up having stuff in them that is really just keeps us in shame and actually deepens shame. And secondly, what it does then in deepening shame is deepen anger. So the solutions that we come up with do not fix us. They make it worse, and they make us more angry in the process. So if we don't deal with this shame stuff in a healthy way, we're in big trouble. Okay, so let me give you the example. Somebody would come up to you tonight and say, "You're a goof." How would you respond? Now, you got to know, you can't fool me on this, because I've watched clients where somebody actually has called them a goof. And there, in my mind, there is, if you're not an addict or you're come out of a religious culture, and you go, "What in the world is he talking about?" Goof is the worst name you can call somebody. You can't pick a worse one, okay? So I have actually seen somebody call somebody else a goof, and the change in the eyes in 1/1000th of a second was shocking. And they were ready to kill that person. Now, I want you to think about something. I don't want to use myself as some hero here, but if somebody came up to me, I've dealt with a lot of the shame stuff in my life. If somebody came up to me and called me goof, and they actually have, I don't know that I'd get mad. I might be a little hurt, but I wouldn't get angry. Because in my mind, what's their problem? I'm fine. But if somebody came up to one of you with lots of shame issues and said, "You're a goof," World War III would break out. Now, what's the point that I'm trying to make? If you don't deal with your shame in a healthy way, you're going to have some big trouble. So let me start to show you what happens. The flaws in the plan. Do you realize if you don't deal with your shame, but you're dependent on other people validating your value and your lovability, you're giving them power over you. You're giving them lots of power. So when somebody comes up and calls you a goof and you react, you've given them power to make you react. What's that all about? Let me take that further. I have watched this happen over and over again. I have watched adult women still chasing daddy wanting daddy to validate that they're beautiful and a wonderful mother and a wonderful person, and daddy doesn't. And they're walking around angry as anything all the time because daddy's got all the power over them, over their mood, over their emotions. Why? Because of their shame. They've given daddy the power because they need his validation because they can't validate themselves. And I have seen the tragedy of that over and over again. Let me take it further. I have watched men chase women around after the woman says it's over. I have watched women chase men around. Why? Because we broke up, but you still have to say I was a good person. I need you to validate that. I can't feel good about myself unless you say I'm good. You've given them all the power. And so you're going to run around after them forever until you deal with the shame. Take it further. I have watched adults chase their children around, say, do you love mommy? Do you love mommy? They need mommy. They need the child to validate that they're a good mommy. They're giving that child power. And so, if they ever have to discipline the child, then they feel so bad, oh, I'm a terrible mom, or I'm a terrible dad. They chase the child around even more, saying, here's a sucker, here's a toy. Do you forgive me? Do you love me? You're setting up a new queen and a new king in your house because of your shame. So that becomes such an important thing. And then, do you know what happens? When you give somebody else power to determine your worth, you get more angry because they never do it well enough. That takes to the second flaw. When you are dependent on other people to validate your worth, what you are doing is setting up unrealistic expectations of those people. Let me explain that one. Let's just take this out of unhealthy for a minute. So let's say there's somebody in your life who's healthy, who is validating your worth, who is communicating to you that you have value, that you are lovable. What you can do in your mind, if you haven't dealt with your shame, is to say, they have to now treat me perfectly and validate me perfectly in every situation. That means whenever I want to talk, they have to drop everything and listen. And whenever I need to spend time with them and ask some questions, they need to drop everything and make time for me. And they have to treat me perfectly. They can never look past me or not look in my eyes, or they can never look down or watch the TV. If they do any of that, they're bad and I'm angry. What have you done? You are now demanding that everybody treat you perfectly, but you don't have to treat anybody perfectly because you're sick. That is sick. And that is going to set you up to be angry at everybody sooner or later because nobody can treat you that perfectly. Let me give you the next one that happens. If you have lots of shame and you're kind of looking to people to remove that shame, what I have found is this: the more shame you have, the more you distort what other people say to you and what other people do to you. I've used the finger wagging illustration, and for those who've seen it, you can tune me out for a minute, but for others, it's the best one I have. I grew up in a family when you're making a point, you wag your finger. My wife grew up in a family where if your finger was wagged at you, you're bad. And that was trouble. So we get married, we're having our first kind of animated discussion, and I'm wagging my finger, and she's getting mad. And I go, why? You're saying I'm bad. I'm saying, no, I'm not saying you're bad. Yes, you are. Now we got another argument going on over here. So if you really pay attention when I speak, I always have half a finger. I fixed that problem. So the point is this. What happened because of my wife's experience is now she read my actions through distorted glasses. And we do that. One of the things that I do, and part of it's just being nervous, but when my wife would start getting angry, I'd smile. That was not a good idea. Because she thought I was laughing at her. And what I was saying is, I'm scared to death, and all I know what to do is smile a little bit. Try to lighten the mood or something. So I had to learn to take the smile off my face because it wasn't working. But those are the kind of things that happen. Now, I got to say this because I love watching sports. You know that. Most of the time, if my wife or kids come in and I'm watching sports, I have no problem turning away from the TV or listening to them, giving them my attention. And they expect that, okay? But they have to realize something. If you're down to the last 2 minutes of a game and the score's tied, I'm not stopping to watch just because you want to talk. But in early marriage, my wife is thinking, you're ignoring me. You like TV more than me. You like sports more than me. No, I don't. Yes, you do. You're watching it and you won't look at me. You got to understand. Okay, enough of that one. But that's the point, okay? So you get all of that kind of stuff that begins to happen. Now let me take it to the next step. If you got lots of shame, it totally messes up how you approach conflict. You see, when you have conflict in a relationship, the goal that should be with every couple in that relationship is, let's talk about this so that we understand it accurately so that we can resolve it properly, okay? That should be the goal. If you've got tons of shame and there's conflict, you go into fear mode. Uh-oh, there's going to be a winner and a loser. Somebody's going to be made to look bad or wrong, and I've got shame happening, so that's not going to be me. So now the purpose of the argument is not to see things clearly. The purpose of the argument is so that nobody sees your shame. And now the argument or the conflict gets totally off the tracks. Okay, so let me just give you very quickly a couple of examples. We have a dog that if you leave your bedroom door open, he will go into your garbage can and he will take out your Kleenexes and he will take them out in the living room and he'll shred them. And if you leave a bathroom door open and there's women with products, he will go in and find those and take those out and he'll shred those, okay? So we have a rule around our house that when you leave for the day, you shut your bedroom door, and the last person to leave shuts the bathroom door. Every once in a while, I come home, and guess what I find? Shredded. So if I was to go to one of my daughters and say, your bedroom door was open, and Daisy got into your garbage can. If she had a lot of shame, do you know how she'd respond? Couldn't have been me. No. Are you blaming me for stuff again? You always blame me for stuff. Do you just see how that argument went from the point to the shame issue? And the issue was no longer what happened, and it was no longer sorry, I forgot. It was, I don't want to look bad. That now became the priority. At that point, there's no point in discussing anything else because you're not going to get anywhere. Now, my wife's not here tonight. But I do have permission to tell this story, okay? So you got to know that up front. Okay, when my wife grew up, she was a twin sister. Her twin loved to cook, so she cooked everything. When my wife and I got married, my wife basically had never cooked, okay? So you got to remember that. She's still not the greatest cook, but she's a lot better than she was. And she will tell you the very same thing. That's why you don't have to go running to her and try to mend her feelings here, okay? First week we're married, I'm working at General Motors, and I come home from work, and my wife's crying, and there's a big black circle burned right through the carpet. And I said, what happened? She said, well, the rice started to burn, so I took the pan and I put it on the floor, and it burned a hole through the carpet, so now we got a burnt carpet and burnt rice. Okay, so that's kind of the history where we started. It's gone all uphill from there. But this actually would happen. So if at Christmas or Thanksgiving or something, and my wife's cooking it, and I would go out and say, do you need any help cooking? All I was saying, you're doing a lot. Do you want me to help? What does a shame person hear? You saying I'm a terrible cook? Wow, that just went bad. No point having that discussion now. See you later. And that's the shame stuff. So that I made my point, I hope. There's other illustrations I could give. So final thing, because we're running out of time. What I want you to see is this. Hopefully you can begin to see if you don't deal with shame, you are going to, through all of those strategies which have those flaws, only end up with more shame. And you're going to end up feeling worse, and then you're going to have more anger. And so what do you have to do to heal from this shame? And that's so much what we talk about. And I'm just going to mention them. You can read them. But you have to start by saying, I accept me. That means I accept the body I have, the personality I have, the brains, the upbringing that I have. I finally accept who I am. And that means you have to begin to confront the lies that you believed about yourself. And you have to begin to say, no, that's not true. And in my mind, a key piece with this is you need a relationship with God. You need to know what He says, because He's the only one that knows you inside out and can tell you honestly about you, and it's good. And you have to be able to trust that somehow you had the upbringing that would somehow prepare you to do something nobody else could do. And that is such an important thing. And then you have to begin taking risks of taking walls down and armor off and developing healthier relationships and sharing about yourself. Well, I hope that helps you a little bit. Let's just pray. Father, you know that there's no person who is totally free of shame. And we all have that area to deal with to some degree, but there's some here who just have tons and tons of shame. And I just pray that you would help them to find healing and growth in this area. Amen.